I also think how the parents interact together around their own finances is extremely impactful. When we ask our clients, hey, tell us about what money was like growing up, they often reference how their parents handled money together, more so than how their parents handled money with them individually. So I think how the parents, how their values are intermixed with the decisions they make is being watched very closely by our children, and our children will remember that. Welcome to Money Dates, the podcast that makes money conversations with your partner feel a little less taboo. I'm Natalie Slagle, a certified financial planner, and I'm joined by my husband and business partner, Dan Slagle, also a certified financial planner. Say hi, Dan.
Hello.
In each episode, we'll share honest stories and practical tips to help you and your partner feel more connected and confident on your financial journey. So grab your drink, get comfortable, and join us for our Money Dates. Hello, Dan.
It's always fun to come back to the podcast room and it have just be the two of us after having some guests. Not that I love having guests, but this is our money date today.
Ooh, cute. It is our money date. And I can't believe it's already April. It's April when we are recording this, and it's going to be April when this comes out.
Wow. Way to let the listeners know that we are not ahead of the game at all.
I know some podcasters are like months ahead and we're like, that's not how we do things. But then we can be a little bit more current because tax season is over for those who have filed by the 15th.
Ooh, thank goodness, right? No one likes tax season.
Yes, it does. It gets a little busy for us. And this was the first year that our firm offered tax prep services to our clients. So exciting. My dream came true. I've always wanted to incorporate tax prep into what we do since we do tax planning throughout the entire year for our clients. And now I can actually see what all of our hard work, how it comes to fruition. It's a really exciting time for those who
and tax season doesn't just end on April 15th, right? Like the next wave of our client meetings, we're doing mid-year tax projections and tax planning to help clients identify opportunities to, whether it's to save on taxes, to take advantage of certain strategies given their tax brackets, right? Even though tax season is officially done April 15th, unless you file an extension, there is still a lot of work to be done for 2026 to set yourself up come April 15th of 2027. So it's just it's a revolving door. It never ends.
No, it doesn't. And I believe our newsletter is going to talk about, what you need to focus on now that tax season is over. So if you're not on our newsletter yet, you should be, because we address all these things, whether you're a client or not. So get on our newsletter, www.fusefinancial.com/sign up. Anyways, let's get to the topic at hand, which I love what the title is for this, because I think it hits home for a lot of our listeners and certainly our clients and for us. The high earners problem. Are we spoiling our kids?
Ooh, that's a loaded question.
It is a loaded question, and which is why we're going to have a whole podcast about it. Dan, what comes to mind when you hear that? The high earners problem. Are we spoiling our kids?
Well, we only have a kid, singular, as of right now for us, right? So we do work with a lot of high earners, as you mentioned, and one thing we hear surprisingly often is some version of I don't want my kids to turn out entitled.
Right.
And we're going to get into that today. I feel like you and I have occasionally had our own moments that made us realize this is something that we need to be intentional about later.
We'll get into it a little later. Yeah,
okay.
Let's get into it a little later. But it's so many feelings here, so many feelings. So why is this uniquely hard for high earners? Why do you think, Dan?
Well, I think it's I'll call it uniquely hard. I'll use your words.
Mm-hmm.
Because high earners often have the ability to afford the option to say yes. They can always afford to say yes if their children are asking for something, for example. So saying no is a choice. It's still a choice, not necessarily a necessity.
Right. Like, just because I can afford this doesn't mean I need it or you need it, child. I was thinking that the other day. What were we doing? Oh, so we give our daughter prune juice a lot. And sometimes she doesn't drink it all. And I'm like, I'm so sick of dumping, whether it's milk or juice, down the drain. The other night I dumped the prune juice she didn't drink in a cup, and then I put it in the fridge because I had to switch her. We should maybe get more than one cup. I had to switch her cup from being filled with juice to being filled with milk. But I was like, I don't want to dump this out. And literally the thought came to me, I can afford to dump this out. Although the prune juice we get is expensive, but I can afford to dump this out. And I was kind of proud of myself in that moment because it was exactly what you're talking about, Dan. But I'm going to choose not to, even though I can afford to dump it out. And I know this is a really small example, but it's like these micro decisions of, I want our daughter to see us actively choosing a response or a purchase, not because it's about affordability, but it's about values and premise and things like that.
We're talking about spoiling our children, our child, and your example is prune juice, saving prune juice. That's ridiculous.
It's, but it literally just happened. Okay, Dan, spoiled. I want to hear your definition. Like, what does spoiled mean to you?
Spoiled. That's a really good question. Can I just use our old friend Merriam-Webster?
Fine.
Okay, fine. I'm going to read what's the definition of spoiled is. To impair the disposition or character of by overindulgence or excessive praise. B, to pamper excessively, coddle.
Okay.
That was gibberish. So what I'm taking from that is, and then there's like hyperlinks to other words. I think that's why they kind of do it. But anyway, so I think what I'm taking from that is like pampering someone, in this instance, our child, in a way that maybe changes or alters their character.
Yes, that's deep.
Well, maybe I'm a deep person.
Okay. That's your definition. Great. Okay, so something that's altering.
Hold on. That is not my definition. I clearly cited Merriam-Webster.
I know, but I thought
I came up with that definition. Okay, for me, what does spoiled mean? It's still a hard question because when I think about the word spoiled, it's usually some after effect of something that has happened.
That's a good point.
Right. And the after effect to me, if our daughter did something and the initial thought was, wow, she spoiled it. It like leads to a sense of like entitlement after something has happened.
Yes.
That's how I think about it. How do you think about being spoiled?
I think it's just as simple as not appreciating the value and the work behind something. Just simply a lack of appreciation, whether that's the money, what it took to earn that money to buy it. I think that when I think of someone being spoiled, but it's not always money. Like sometimes people, I know my mother listens to this podcast. So mom, throwing you under the bus, woo. It's making her smile already. I can feel it. But my mom will joke and she'll be like, oh my gosh, truly parents of only one kid, you two just spoil her. But she always means it with like the coddling and not financial. And she's like, oh, poor, like our daughter is maybe crying. She needs mama or dada. And I'm like, what am I going to do? And my mom's always poking fun. She's not serious. But it made me think spoiled isn't always financial related. It could be how we act towards someone else. And I think for the purposes of this podcast and this episode, obviously we're going to talk about the financial aspects of spoiling our children, but I think it can also come out in how we parent.
Yeah, and I think it's a word that gets thrown out in the example you provided. I think it's a word that can just be used without giving any true thought into, especially like children.
Yes.
Right. And like bad, maybe, and we'll associate the word spoiled with negative behavior, leading to some sort of bad behavior. As I think more about this, the reality is our daughter's almost 2. she's communicating, not in full sentences yet. I think maybe we would feel the sense of being spoiled more if our child was at an older age where it was very easy to show that entitlement or to show that lack of what we'll associate maybe like a work ethic or gratitude towards receiving something, right? So it's hard for me to say, well, my 2-year-old is spoiled because she's not really showing that or like vocalizing it.
Right, exactly. But I don't know if they need to show sign. I think we think of like a spoiled kid, like they're always asking for more and they don't appreciate. I don't know if we need the response from the child to know if they're spoiled. And the first 3 years of their life is what I'm talking about, because they might not. I don't know how much longer we have until Jay goes to the store with us and she's like, I want that, I want that, I want that. She's not really doing it yet, but I feel like we're getting close.
She's actually there with one specific thing right now, hot chocolate, right? Like anytime. Yesterday I was driving her to daycare and we drove by Starbucks and she went to that Starbucks, she's been there maybe once or twice when my dad was in town and they like had a cup of hot chocolate together. As soon as we drove by, I forgot to mention this to you. She was just yelling, hot cocoa, hot cocoa, hot cocoa. So yeah, I guess maybe I'm already starting to see it the more I think about some real life situations that we're in.
Well, and I wanted to talk about another moment where we've kind of had to stop and think about, okay, what decisions are we making here and how does it impact her, both from a beneficial standpoint, but then maybe from I'm just going to keep using the word spoiling standpoint. And that to us has come up when it comes to the decisions we've been making around funding her 529 plan. Because I think about, I think it's a little over $30,000 right now in her 529 plan. And I have wanted to fund that as fast as possible so that it has a bigger chunk of money with a longer timeline to grow, because that's how we get the tax benefits from the 529 plan. However, I think about this kid over here has over $30,000 set aside for college. She is not even 2. I had $0 set aside. And that is not knocking my parents, because I feel like I'm in a really good spot. And so they've done other things to make sure I'm in a really good spot. But it does make me think, like, what's going on here?
It's hard because with the decisions that we've made in terms of funding her account, a lot of the contributions or that account balance has come from us, right? Like obviously grandparents or other family members have contributed to that account. We're very thankful for that. But a lot of that has come from us, our household. And I think the conflict, the issues that come up when we're thinking about, well, do we need to fund more of higher education in the future? The conflict for me is, well, what could you and I, be doing with that money right now?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And thinking about alternatives, whether the alternative is to let's travel, let's take a trip. How about you and I get a couple $100, $1,000 to go spend however we want? But the alternative path that we typically take is let's continue to save. And maybe that's a nature of our profession, but I also feel like we see this within our clients as well. So those, I think those are some of the things that come up for me when we think about funding her 529 and the balance is thinking about, well, what is the alternative? And I think what allows us to feel better about making more contributions into the 529 is doing that deep dive education analysis that we do for our clients, but you and I personally being able to see how it impacts our daughter and saying, here's where higher education is going to be, 16 years from now for her from a cost standpoint, with baseline education inflation at 5-6%, whatever we've historically seen, and showing, even 30,000 today, that's only going to fund X percent of her overall college. I don't know if you even recall like what that amount truly is. Well,
it's essentially because right now we're inflating college at 5% and the rate of return is around 7%. So it's not where the net rate of return there isn't very high because of our assumptions. So the $30,000 is just a little over 1 year fully paid. But regardless, that's a lot more than most children who will be going to college her age will have. Therefore, does that make her spoiled? Just that, and our goal is to have more than 1 year's worth saved. I'd like to have most of it saved in the 529 plan, maybe not 100%, just in case. Well, that's not what we're getting into on this podcast, but the fact alone that she has something saved, which is going to be significantly more than the average kid of her generation going to college. Does that make her quote unquote spoiled? No, but I think what then to make it not a spoiled event or whatever, that comes down to you and I having the right conversations with her and talking to her about the decisions we made and are making along the way to give her this unique opportunity.
Yeah. I want to pause for a second and just let our listeners know, if you're interested in learning more about our take on one of the best 3 ways that we feel is to save for your child's future, make sure to check out our blog that we wrote on it, and we'll make sure to link that in the show notes as well. So going back to what you just said, I feel like you even have like a real world example that you've seen with a client in terms of like maybe curbing the idea of entitlement, being spoiled. It's really about setting the framework for constructive conversations with your child, right? And like what your expectations are, because we can't have this conversation with our daughter right now. Again, her being 2, she wouldn't comprehend what was going on, right? But if she was 18, if she was 19, that would be a different conversation that we would be having. Right.
So I recently met with a couple who in their late 40s, early 50s, and they sent their firstborn to college this year. Really exciting, right? Really exciting time. And I was so impressed. We were just kind of talking about the finances of it because it impacts their cash flow. Now they're able to pay for all of tuition, room and board through their 529 plans and a little bit from cash flow. But the reality is that there are expenses above and beyond tuition and room and board. You still have to live, right? Their daughter still has these just living expenses. And so they sat down with their daughter and they made a list that it was just in like an Apple Note, and their daughter had access to the note as well. So it's just like on their phone. It's not this really formalized thing, but they did have a conversation about, here is what we will continue to be responsible for paying. And here is what you now are responsible for paying. And part of the daughter being responsible for paying is they actually gave her kind of an allowance every week. And it wasn't very much. To me, I thought it felt kind of low, but what do I know? And so there was quite a bit on here's what you're responsible for. And the list that they're responsible for, kind of the typical, like the insurances, they gave her like a grocery stipend, but it was like, if you spend more on groceries, then that goes into your bucket. But one of the things that I really liked on there, and they had this specifically written out, was we will buy you clothes enough to make you, it was like enough to keep you from being smelly and have ratty clothes, but not
smelly.
Enough.
They wrote smelly in the
I don't know if they wrote smelly, but it was like enough to clothe you, but not enough to keep you fashionable. And I
think you said I think you told me ahead of this, it was like enough to, or we don't want you to appear grungy, I think is the word you use, which being in the Pacific Northwest, that's like a style, right?
Yeah. But they were like, you might have to just shop at H&M and Zara, and that's it. Like, this is the fast fashion budget. This is not the high-end clothes budget. And so I just loved how it was this easy to digest list. And to me, that was them having this intentionality and these conversations around a child who is likely going to be, I don't want to say better off, but that's kind of the term, but like financially have less of a financial burden coming out of college than most people. And yet she kind of understands what mom and dad are paying for. She's having financial conversations with mom and dad. And to me, I'm hopeful that is going to be more impactful than actually having all of these things paid for, is the fact that mom and dad sat me down. We had this conversation. To me, that was because these clients, they make a lot of money. They're doing really well. They have a lot of assets. And again, it comes to that choice. They have chosen to say no to some things. And that, to me, was such a great example on how they have this high earner problem. They are getting rid of it because they are choosing to be intentional with the conversations they're having with their kids and what they're going to pay for and why.
Yeah. So again, setting expectations ahead of time and just making sure everyone's on the same page, because, from an outside perspective, you could still say, well, that child is spoiled, right? Because maybe someone who's looking in doesn't have that opportunity or like privilege to get a clothing budget to not look grungy or whatever it is. And this is something that comes up all the time with finances. Again, it's all that really matters is how you perceive it, especially like within your internal family. And you just don't know you can't control everything else that's happening in everyone else's life. Right? Because again, like it's all about perception.
Yeah. And you never know someone's financial situation. I've said that before on this podcast. I'll say it again. Our wealthiest clients, you wouldn't think they have more than 200 grand to their name. So it's really interesting. Okay, well, let's go back to you and I, Dan. Do you think that you and I have tension or maybe not tension, but like differences in how we approach this?
Well, we already touched on it. The one thing I wanted to mention in this part of the episode is based on how we are paid, sometimes we can receive larger, I'll call them paychecks throughout the year. And a lot of times when that happens, it's, well, what do we do with the excess money that we don't necessarily need to cover our baseline living expenses, right? So what has been really interesting for me during this process of, again, only the last 2 years, is when those events happen, when we do have some extra cash to think about what to do with, almost always you have put money into our daughter's 529 before like even having that conversation with me. Or if not, what you'll do is we'll be having the conversation on the couch or in our breakfast nook. I'll just throw that out there.
Love our breakfast nook.
When we're having that conversation, the first thing you will do is like, you'll just like pull up her account on your phone and be like, I'm just going to transfer this money. That has also happened.
Has it?
Yes. Why that is interesting to me is because, as we've talked in previous episodes about like our past money experiences, how we were raised with money, you definitely are more so on the, I'll call it frugality. Like you had to work more than I did growing up. You had to pay for more things than I did growing up. And I think it's just really fascinating that you are the one taking the initiative to spoil, air quotes for those of you listening, our daughter.
Yeah. At least when it comes to her college education.
Yeah.
Yes. That is my answer to that. Yes. Am I supposed to?
No, I mean, it wasn't a question. You asked me the question if there was like any conflict or tension. I don't know if it goes up to the extreme of conflict, because as maybe we haven't told listeners, you and I have never fought before.
We've never had a fight ever.
Never once had a fight.
Just kidding. We fought like 2 days ago, 2 hours ago.
That's not true. I haven't.
I know, Dan. Anyways, I used to keep a fight journal. Have we talked about the fight journal on this podcast yet?
No, I don't think so.
Out.
Yeah, it was really weird. You bought that. I'm like, why are you recording our fights? And I think you recorded one and then you stopped.
Yeah, I think it still is a really good idea, because I was like, I should journal about a fight we had and then look back on it and laugh, because it's probably really stupid and something we both don't care about anymore. And that is mostly true. So
anyway, so going back to, you asked me the question, that example I provided is the moment of tension that I can more so associate with finances in dealing with our daughter's situation. And for me, the tension comes from, well, last year at this time, again, we've talked about this so much. We were thinking about buying a home, down payment, right? So thinking about allocating some of those resources, and you still taking a healthy chunk of the excess money we had and just immediately putting it into 529. So the tension for me is like, again, going back to what we talked about in the beginning, what is the alternative? Like, what are the alternative options to do with those funds? And sometimes, sometimes we want to spoil ourselves.
Yeah. Like you and
let's
me.
just be real. Like, yeah, we work and then it's just nonstop. And like, there's been so many times over the past year where it's just like, I need to get out. I need to do something. I need to like treat myself in some form or fashion. And sometimes I do feel like if I'm so focused on her and her future savings, like I want to be there to enjoy it. I want to be in a good mental state to enjoy it. So I think for me, the tension comes from, well, can we be taking a trip? Can you and I be hiring a babysitter more often? Can we be investing in experiences? That's my moment of tension. And just like, how do we go about solving for that?
Right. I think if we talk about high earners, how do we not spoil our kids? You're coming up with the second question. Okay, let's not spoil them or let's not spend money on them. So what are we going to do with that money instead? And even if we were in the frugality, save world that Natalie tends to stay in, it'd be like, why am I taking 10 grand and putting it in the 529 plan when I should maybe be thinking about 10 grand and putting it in an additional retirement account or brokerage account so you and I can be financially independent that much sooner? And to me, I think there's something about, I have this expectation of myself that we are going to pay for our daughter's education, even though I tell our clients all the time, it is not necessarily your responsibility. Society may tell you it's, and so I'm like, well, there's this looming, crazy, expensive thing coming, so we got to do whatever we can to tackle it first. But there's also an even more expensive thing coming for you and I, Dan, and that is retirement and not having to generate income anymore. That is way more expensive than college. So we need to put a lot of eggs in that basket, way more than the 529 plan basket. But so I went down that route to kind of give you and the listener some background on how it is so easy for me to quickly say, oop, 10 grand, Jay's 529 plan, boom, done.
Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about what actually works. And I think this maybe will apply more so to wealthy families that have children who, let's say, are in kindergarten or older. So there was research done in 2025 done by Talker Research and Acorns. It was like a collaborative study of, I think it was around 2,000 families. And one of the like summary points on it was like, they called it 2025 allowance inflation.
Okay.
It's like a play on inflation. But it was the study that essentially found that the average kid allowance has now grown to $52 per month.
Okay. Does that feel like a lot or a little to you? What's your thought?
It feels like a lot more than what I had growing up.
Dan, you're old now. Older. $52 a month. Okay. I mean, it depends, like how old is a kid in this, and what are you not paying for that the allowance is paying for?
I don't think the study got into that. I mean, now you're busting my chops here.
All right. Well, what else did it say?
Well, I just found it fascinating, like the way allowances have been like shifting again, like relating back to when I was a child and had an allowance or earned money from doing household chores, for example, right? Like $52 a month seems high based on my experience of what I had growing up. I also found it like fascinating, the shift between like our children receiving money through cash, like digital apps, preloaded debit cards. So there are some interesting numbers on that. 56% of respondents, the allowance was given in the form of cash. 17% is on digital apps now.
Like Venmo and Cash
Probably.
App.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the remaining 14% was preloaded debit cards.
I like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea.
Right. Especially if the kid can also somehow get access to the balance of the debit card so they can see it go down every time they swipe it.
Yeah.
I think that's the issue with credit cards is we don't see anything go down. We just only see something go up, which is the balance, but you're not seeing your bank balance go down at the same time. And that's a really important piece for kids to understand when they swipe is something inevitably does go down. I was kind of thinking in my head, like we pay our babysitter through Venmo. And so it's interesting that times have changed.
Yeah. And I think so. The other things that come out is from this study, non-monetary allowance includes like if you did a chore, for example, it includes things like experiences and screen time.
Rewarding your child with screen time. I hate saying I will never because things change. I will never.
Okay. Anyways, here's my biggest takeaway from this study.
Okay.
And I think this is where we can probably spend some time talking about the overall study. 2/3 of respondents believe they know exactly how much to give and why they are giving allowances.
Okay.
While the other 1/3 needs to consult with other parents for reassurance.
I would be in the 1/3. I'd be like, yo, friends, what are you doing?
Unless you feel just like really confident about it, like how would you know how much to give your child from an allowance standpoint? It could be like an easy, like, I'll give you $10, $20, or maybe the kid has some say of like, hey, I need $20 to go to the movies or whatever it may be. Maybe then that you don't really need reassurance with that aspect from other parents.
Right. That's why I think the allowance needs to be like back to what our clients did is it needs to say, this is all the things we cover. These are all the things that you need to save your allowance for, like buying games on the tablet or getting 2 things of candy at the movie theater versus 1, whatever it is. But maybe that is how it's not, okay, what are your friends getting? It's what are we expecting you to use your money for? And are we giving you enough to afford that?
Yeah. I think maybe some practical approaches, like, again, we've been talking a little bit more about allowances in this part. How do you think, is there a shift or is there a difference in entitlement or spoiling if your child is old enough to either receive an allowance versus like earning money themselves, and like how you as a parent would view that?
I've heard different approaches with this. Like one approach that I liked is things that every adult needs to be able to do post leaving the home. You should not get an allowance for because like you shouldn't get rewarded for making your bed. Like that's just kind of an expectation as like a responsible adult or whatever it may be. But the things like raking the leaves and helping mom and dad in the yard, those are kind of the additional. That to me is something that if you do something, above and beyond, that to me is worth compensating the child for. There's also, I feel like, an element of maybe at some point you just give an allowance because you want them to have the autonomy to make financial purchases and make those decisions. So I can see a world where we do both. Hey, your allowance is this. If you want more than that, you got to do more. You got to do it with these extra projects. But your allowance is just like, that's what comes up for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I think this is just, to me, it's like, what's we talked about like the idea of entitlement or being spoiled as like an after effect of something. I think what it comes down to is like, what's like the values conversation underneath it all?
Mm-hmm.
Is it really about money, or is it about like what you at the end of the day want your kids to value and like show appreciation for?
Yeah. And I also think how the parents interact together around their own finances is extremely impactful. Not just, the decisions they're making about with their kid, but like Dan, how do you and I talk about money in front of our daughter? And I know right now it doesn't matter as much, but at some point it's going to matter, probably earlier than what we anticipate. And when we ask our clients, hey, tell us about what money was like growing up, they often reference how their parents handled money together, more so than how their parents handled money with them individually. So I think how the parents, how their values are intermixed with the decisions they make is being watched very closely by our children, and our children will remember that.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question. What do you want our daughter to think about wealth, like when she's older? Let's say when she's like 30.
I don't want her to be afraid of money. I want her to be comfortable, and I want her to, I think money is a relationship. Like we all have individual relationships with money. And if she chooses to have a partner, then how they interact with money, I just hope that when she thinks of wealth, she thinks of the opportunities it can provide her and the people she loves and the organizations she loves. So I hope there's just like a healthy relationship there for her.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Do you feel like is there a question that every high earning couple could be thinking about or asking themselves?
Yes. One question that I want listeners to talk about with their partner is, what does enough look like for our kids? And just have the open-ended conversation. What does enough look like for our kids?
I love it. I love it. For me, the big takeaway is just like intentionality is like the name of the game here. Spoiling isn't like about how much you have. To me, it's now, after this conversation, a little bit more about like whether you're thoughtful with it.
Right. And if you want some help with these conversations, reach out to us. Schedule a free consult. It's on our website, fusefinancial.com. And I want to give a tease for next week's episode, the next
everyone
episode.
Everyone loves a good tease.
See, look at us getting ahead. We can tease the next episode. So we have the prenup coach. That's right. The prenup coach on our podcast, Kaylin Dillon. I'm so excited to chat with her about prenups, postnups for those who are already married. And it's like, oh, we didn't get the prenup done, but do we need a postnup? You know, things change. You might have gotten an inheritance. Your income looks a lot different. I'm really excited because you and I, Dan, we don't have a prenup or a postnup. And so maybe this conversation is like, do we need one of those? So tune in next week. Really, I keep saying next week. This is bi-weekly. Maybe we need to make it weekly. But our next episode with Kaylin it's going to be really fun.
Thanks, Natalie. Great conversation today.
Thanks, Dan. Bye-bye.
Bye. Hey, if you've enjoyed this episode and are looking for personalized financial guidance, schedule a free complimentary consultation using the link in the description below. Natalie and Dan Slagle are the founding partners of Fuse Financial Planning, a registered investment advisor. The information provided in this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice or a recommendation to buy or sell any securities. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Advisory services are offered to clients or prospective clients where Fuse Financial Planning and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For more information, including our disclosures, please visit our website at www.fusefinancial.com.